around. And if you imagine the bottom of your rib cage, the opening of the bottom of your rib cage is one bowl. And then you imagine your pelvis as the other bowl. You want to imagine that your rib cage is a mirror image of your pelvic. So they would stack on top of each other. Hopefully that makes sense. But if not, our tendency is to push either the ribs forward and move the pelvis into a posterior tilt, or we'll do the opposite. We'll slump, and then we don't have that mirror image. So when the bowl of the bottom of the rib cage matches the bowl of the top of the pelvis, it's called the zone of apposition, and that's where our diaphragm functions most freely and most healthily, right? So when the rib cage bowl mirrors the pelvic bowl, the diaphragm is more easily able to expand downwards evenly. So that's kind of what we're moving with today. So from that, we're going to come down. Now, the bottom of your blanket is going to align with the bottom of your rib cage. So knees bent. Find the bottom of your rib cage and bring it to the bottom of your blanket, and then you'll adjust the block so that it's supporting your head. And bring one hand to your lower belly, one hand to the bottom of your rib cage. And if you have that extra block, you can bring it between your knees. It just helps to create a little natural intra-abdominal pressure through the TVA, the transverse abdominis. So one hand on your lower belly, one hand on the bottom of your rib cage. With your head on the block, it should naturally move the chin towards your throat. Allow the fronts of your collarbones to broaden, so creating that smile where the ends of your collarbones close to your shoulders slightly expand and lift higher than the middle that attach to the breastbone. And just start to breathe. And as you start to breathe, start to feel the back of your rib cage. So where the blanket is kind of feedback at the bottom of your rib cage. See if you can start to direct your breath into that space. So the space of the kidneys or the back of the lungs. When the breath is in and out through the nose. We're going to transition into that low, meaning taking it deep into the bottom of the lungs, the kidney area. We're going to start to move into a slow breath. So finding Visamavriti, or a 1-2 breath, where your exhalation is twice as long as your inhalation. So this may be 3 and 6, where you inhale for a count of 3. And you exhale for a count of 6. Or it may be 4 and 8. And then the breath is also light. So instead of trying to create a bigger breath so that you can force air into the lungs, try to let the breath slowly and lightly come in. Continuing to find awareness of the breath in the back body. So seeing if you can sense the movement of the ribs and the lungs and the kidneys into that bottom part of the blanket where the ribs meet the low back. And just take a couple of more breaths. And then slowly rock to either side and remove the props. So just take the props out to the side and come back onto your back. And if you didn't have a block between the knees, you only had the block for your head, go ahead and move the block now between your knees. Bring the hand back to the lower belly and the lower ribs, chin tucked, neck long, broadening across the collarbones. Lower ribs down and in. So see if you can find that breath in the same region of your rib cage where the blanket was, without pressing the lower back into the floor. And keeping your breath light, so not making the breath bigger, consciously bring the breath into the sides of your rib cage. Bring the arms out from the body, T to the body. Exhale, feel the rib cage relax or the ribs draw in. Again, breathing into the ribs. Start to bring the knees above your hips as you exhale. So shins parallel to the floor, knees directly above the hips. And so we can make this easier by bringing our knees towards our chest. So if you feel a lot of tension in your lower back, or if you feel your neck starting to tense, bring your knees a little closer towards your chest. But if you can, keep the knees above the hips or challenge the core a little bit more. Find your cues, chin tucked, neck long, collarbones wide, bottom of the rib cage knitting in, lower ribs moving towards the floor, but the lower back stays slightly away from the floor. So the pelvis stays in neutral. And again, find that 1-2 breath. So finding an inhale for 3 or 4, and an exhale twice as long, so 6 or 8. Slightly dorsiflex your ankles, so point the toes up towards the sky. And can you maintain this without reverting to using the muscles on the front of your neck or bringing the breath up into your chest? And notice we still have that mirror image where the bowl of the rib cage mirrors the bowl of the pelvis. If you were to push your lower back towards the floor, both ends of the bowl open up towards the floor, and the opposite is true. If the back is too far away from the floor, we get this kind of opening in the front of the rib cage. Take a couple of more breaths here, trying to maintain kind of this solid stableness throughout the entire body, where the only movement you feel is that slight expansion of the rib cage as you inhale and the slight descent of the rib cage as you exhale. On your next exhale, slowly lower the feet to the ground. Remove the block between your knees and just start to take your head side to side. So shaking your head no. Keeping your breath low, so deep in the lungs, light and slow. And start to make And in figure 8 with your nose, or you can think of it as kind of painting the floor with the back of your head. We're just creating a little bit of release in your neck. Oftentimes when we do this really strong core awareness, diaphragmatic breathing, we tend to move into using our neck muscles. And bring your arms down beside your body and start to paint the shoulders too. So the shoulders kind of come into the rhythm of the head, and this may look different for all of you. Basically, just kind of let go of control. Let the head continue to draw those figure 8s as the shoulders kind of sway up and down. And then lessen that movement until you come back into stillness. And take the block and place it back between your knees. Hands beside your hips, so elbows close to your ribs, and then bend your elbows with your palms facing in. Tuck your chin, widen across your collarbones. We're going to go into a bridge pose with awareness. So try to maintain the mirror images of the bowls. So inhale, feel your ribs expand. And as you exhale, slowly lift up. Hips lift off the floor. What we want to avoid is the flaring of the ribs up. So the ribs are lower than the pelvis, but you can still connect the front of the rib cage with the hip points at an angle. Inhale, fill the rib cage. As you exhale, lower down. Inhale deep into the lungs. Start to press down through your feet, and as you exhale, lift your hips. Inhale, ribs expand outward. And as you exhale, you move. So we pause on the inhalations to prepare that diaphragmatic breathing. Keep on taking the same movements, so going up and down from bridge to down onto your back. But use the inhalations to create the diaphragmatic pressure, and then the exhale to move. So try to concentrate on the only moving on the exhale and pausing on the inhales. You might start to sink into that 1-2 breath again. So inhaling for a count of 4. And then making the lift, that full exhale for a count of 8. Notice if you're feeling any tension in the jaw or the neck. And try to keep this in this region between your hips and your ribs. The next time you come up into a bridge pose, stay there. Take your hands down beside your body. Palms press into the ground. Press the palms down. Snuggle the shoulders a little closer together. Press to the inner edges of your feet. Squeeze your block. Inhale. Find the sides of the rib cage expanding. And this time as you exhale, lift a little higher. You're going to take 3 of these breaths, trying to keep your exhale twice as long as you maintain this bridge pose. And trying to keep the bottom of the rib cage mirroring the top of the hips. On your next exhale, slowly release down. Release the block from between your knees and extend your legs long. Reach your arms over your head as if you're a starfish. So arms are wide, legs are wide. Inhale. As you exhale, take your left hand towards your body as you reach your right hand across your hip and come up. So the left hand kind of pushes you up as your right hand reaches down your inner left leg. So you're coming into kind of a forward fold. And then you're going to slide back. So inhale, and as you exhale, slide back onto the floor. So we are now requiring our core to do a little bit more work. Inhale to prepare. As you exhale, you're going to come up onto your right hand as you reach your left arm down your right leg and come back down. And if you need to know what this looks like, you can look at me a few times and then see if you can figure it out as you move on your own. So we're adding a twist with a forward fold with a little bit of core work. So we're asking our core to do the work instead of our neck. So as you go from side to side, start to notice, is it the diaphragm and the core muscles that are lifting you up from the floor? Or are you asking your neck, are the front of the neck muscles pulling, engaging to lift you up? And then if you find that, can you find that kind of deep breath into your lungs before you lift up as you exhale? We're going to progress this a little bit. So the next time you come up, so arm reaches across opposite leg, take the hand to the same leg as you bring your other arm across to the opposite leg and slide down. That same arm reaches down the opposite leg and come across. So now we're just creating more of a twist. So you're kind of swinging from side to side as you come into that forward fold. You're swinging to the opposite side and going up the opposite side. Notice how your breath has changed as we start to create a little bit more fluid movement. Can you find, again, that light, low, and slow breath, keeping the breath in and out through your nostrils and taking it deep into your lungs. The next time you come up, stay up and just pause. Let your head hang down, let your spine flex around. And slowly stack one vertebrae over the other, coming into a seated position with your shoulders above your hips, but more importantly, the rib cage directly above your pelvis. So you're sitting on your sit bones. And see, as you come up into the seated position with legs extended, can you take your breath deep? And roll onto your belly. Interlace your fingers, pinky edge of your hands on the floor. Bring your thumbs to touch, keeping the pinky edges of your hands and forearms on the floor. Point your thumbs towards your chest and then rest your forehead in that hole you've created. Press down through the pinky edges of your hands and your inner elbows. Keep your head in the hole and push your sternum, the top of your sternum, as if you're pushing it up between your shoulder blades. Tuck your toes under. Press your heels back as you lift the knees off the floor. So charge the legs. Start to find that deep diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing deep into the lungs, feeling expansion on the side and back ribs. Pushing top of the sternum between the shoulder blades, so broaden across the collarbones. Lift your head out of your hands. Keep your elbows where they are. Take your hands forward. Don't move your elbows, but take your hands shoulder width apart and then turn the thumbs as if they're pointing towards the chest. So we're coming up into a slightly forward Sphinx pose. Sternum pushes towards the shoulder blades or towards the spine between the shoulder blades. Chin is tucked. Toes are still tucked. Reach the heels back. See if you can breathe deep into the lungs. So we're still trying to find that zone of opposition. So the rib cage is above your pelvis still. Keep pressing down through your pinky fingers. Stack your hands, release your forehead to your hands, untuck your toes, and wiggle your hips side to side. Keep your forehead on the floor and reach your arms out to the side, T to the body. Slide your right hand towards your right shoulder. Bend your right knee, pointing the toe up towards the sky. Inhale, bring it all the way down. As you exhale, reach your right foot towards the left side of your mat. So we're coming into a scorpion kind of back bend. Inhale. As you exhale, roll back onto your belly. Reach your right arm long. Take your left hand towards your left shoulder. Bend your left knee. Inhale, breathe deep into the lungs. As you exhale, start to reach left foot towards right side of the mat. Inhale. Exhale, move. So going from side to side, bring right hand in, bend right knee, inhale. Exhale, move. Inhale, pause. Exhale, roll back. And start to do this kind of on your own with your own breath. If you can stretch out the length of the exhalation to be twice as long as the inhalation, you're working the diaphragm a little bit more. You're creating that tolerance to moving and building up carbon dioxide, which is great. Help to change some breathing stuff. Making sure that you pause each time you inhale and moving on the exhale. Sometimes we get in that sync of every time we breathe, we make a different movement. So this is slightly different than how we normally move in yoga. It takes a little bit more kind of thinking about it, moving with intention with the breath. And the next time you finish, come back, stack your hands, and again, wiggle your hips side to side. Bring your hands underneath your shoulders. Press your hands down and come up into cobra pose. Chin tucked towards the throat, so reaching the crown of the head towards the sky. Notice the fronts of the ribs, bring them back. Pressing the fronts of the thighs down, fronts of the feet down. Take a few breaths deep, trying to find as much of the breath moving in the back body as you find in the front. And release. Come up to hands and knees. Tuck your toes under and move back into a downward facing dog. And pressing down through all 10 knuckles of your hands. Lift high up onto your toes. Bend your knees, hinging from your hips.
And then slowly taking your heels towards the floor. So in down dog especially, oftentimes we lose that zone of opposition, letting the rib cage kind of press towards the floor. Can you find where your rib cage mirrors your pelvis here? And it may help to remember that feeling of what it felt like to breathe into the blanket when we first started, and breathing into that space where the blanket was connecting to the kidney area, the bottom of the lungs, the back. So can you find your breath in the back body? Slowly lower down onto your knees. Bring your right foot up between your hands. If it helps to have blocks, you can have blocks for your hands. So right foot up into a low lunge. We're going to go into that low lunge where we feel like we're really stretching the psoas, which usually people think the further they go forward, the more they're stretching their psoas. We're just going to do this kind of for a comparison. So notice what happens when you come in your deepest form of the lunge. Notice how much stability you have in the front of your core. Notice how much stability you have in the back of your core. And if you're like, yep, I'm super strong, question that. I mean, in this position right now, I have no tone in my lower belly. I am just trying to stretch as deep as I can, but I feel no connection to like solid tone. If you have your hands on blocks, come up to the highest level. And then walk your hands up onto your right knee. So take your hands to your pelvis. And in this position, your right hip is going to be slightly higher than your left hip, and that's fine. We want to be able to find to where we can mirror the rib cage bowl with the pelvic bowl. Tuck your left toes under and push the heel back towards the wall behind you. And in this position, you may notice that now your hip is directly above your left knee. Rib cage down and in, so find the mirror. Keep the mirror arms over your head, chin tucked, collarbones wide. Front and back of the pelvis is in neutral. So we're not tilting forward. We're almost drawing the tailbone towards the floor. So in this position, you're actually stretching your psoas. Take a breath, lower part of the rib cage. Gaze with your eyes up, and then see if you can back bend, not from pushing the rib cage forward, but from actually extending the spine. Inhale, lift up. Hands either to the blocks or to the floor. And come back into that low lunge that we just started from. And now compare what felt more supported. What felt like you were stretching the psoas more. Hands to the floor and come back into downward facing dog. Press hands down, all 10 knuckles pressing down. Bend the knees and find front and back of the pelvis in neutral. Match the rib bowl to the pelvic bowl. Take the breath low into the lungs. Slowly, lightly. And see if you can feel that circumference of the lungs, 3D lungs, expanding all the way around. And lower down onto your knees. Bring your left foot forward. And again, go into your deepest form of the lunge. So in this position, when we push the hip forward, we're actually taking the hip
out of extension. It's in extension, but we are creating more extension elsewhere rather than at the front of the hip. Slide back, tuck your left toe or right toe under, and bring your hands up into your knee. Your left hip will now be slightly higher than the right side of your hip, but notice if you tilt into anterior, posterior, and try to keep the bottom of the rib cage, that mirror image of the top of your rib cage. So push your hip forward without moving the front knee. So as if you're pushing the pocket of your right, where your pocket would be, pushing it forward. Bring your arms over your head. Notice the tendency to flare the front of the rib cage. Keep your pelvic bowls mirrored. Pressing right heel back. Start to gaze up with your eyes only. Inhale, find expansion in the ribs. And then see, can you find extension without flaring your ribs forward? So you may notice this takes a little bit more awareness of the core, the front of the core, the transverse abdominis. Lift up. Come back into that forward folding and just notice the difference between what felt more supported. We don't have anything supporting the front of the hip. You're just kind of falling into wherever. Release blocks to either side, hands to the floor, and step back into downward facing dog. See if you can organize your body to find the ability to find ease in the full expansion of the lungs, 3D, all the way around. Shift the weight onto your left foot. Lighten your right foot, hovering it above the floor. See if you can keep that mirror image, ribs to pelvis as you reach the right leg back into three-legged dog. Lift up onto your left toes. Gaze between your thumbs, bend knee to nose, and step your right foot up between your hands. If you have your blocks, take your blocks on either side of your right foot. Right knee directly above your right ankle joint. Find the mirror image. So we're tilted forward, chin tucked, neck long, collarbones wide. Notice the tendency to let your ribs flare towards your thigh and bring them back, finding that mirror image of your pelvis, and then reach the arms straight back. Left heel is reaching towards the floor, towards the back of your mat. Keep your cues, chin tucked, neck long, collarbones wide, mirror image, and see if you can keep your breath low in the lungs, feeling expansion, keeping it slow, and keeping it light. See if you can find that mirror image in your mind as you lift up and bring the arms over the head. So ribs above your pelvic bowl. Low, slow, and light breath. Full expansion all the way around the circumference of the ribs. Slowly lower hands on either side of your right foot and step back to downward facing dog. So each time you come into downward facing dog, see if you can reconnect with all the things that your body is learning.
Taking a moment to make the breath even lighter, slower. It's amazing how challenging standing poses are when you are asking things to work with awareness and attention. So down dog is kind of that place to reconnect and slow down. So shift your weight onto your right foot. Left foot hovers beside. Keep the position, ribs to hips, as you extend left leg back into three-legged dog. Notice if you lose it, reorganize your body according to that kind of internal feeling that we're creating. Lift up onto your right toes if you aren't already there, and gaze between your thumbs, and step left foot up between your hands. Start by coming onto your blocks if you have them. Right heel is reaching towards the floor, and the closer the heel comes to the floor, the more supportive that back leg becomes. So we're using it. Left knee is directly above your ankle joint. Start to find ribs, hip, mirror. Maintain that, inhale, and then as you exhale, lift your arms back. Take a few breaths here. Low, slow, and light. Feeling the back and sides of your rib cage expand as well as the front. Inhale. See if you can maintain that mirror as you come all the way up into Anjaneyasana. You may have to adjust as you lift. And again, move into the space of the breath to find that internal alignment using the breath as your guide, rather than that external of move this here and that there that we normally do with alignment poses. Slowly release the hands on either side of your left foot and step back into downward facing dog. Lower down onto your knees. Toes touch, knees wide. Sit back into child's pose, resting your forehead on the floor. And make those kind of side to side. You're letting the tension of the neck go. So kind of just nod your head side to side. I can't think of what I'm trying to say. Nod no. Allowing the breath to come back into that lowest, slowest, and lightest breath. Continuing to breathe in and out through your nose. And shift forward and come on to hands and knees. First fingers parallel. Spread your hands, knees underneath your hips. Let everything in the front of your body collapse. So release any tone that you have with your front body. And close your eyes and just notice what it feels like to breathe here. And oftentimes this is kind of the position that we take when we stand, when we sit. And then see if you can use your breath to come back into that neutral, where we're finding the mirror image, where the pelvis and the lower rib cage meet. So breath is moving in the kidney area. You still have a slight lower back curve. The pelvis is not tilted, or butt is not sticking up towards the sky, finding that neutral to find the rib cage. So from here, start to shift from one hand to the other. So touch your opposite hand to the opposite shoulder.
And as you start to do this, notice how much movement is going on other places in your spine. Keeping the breath low and slow. Notice if you feel any shifting in your hips side to side. Try to maintain that by keeping kind of internal awareness of your mirror images. And then bring both hands down to the ground. Lift your knees off the floor. Hover them about an inch off the floor. Maintain that mirror, pelvis to hips. And then bring one hand to the opposite shoulder. And the first time you do it, first couple of times you do it, you may feel that there's a lot of shifting side to side with the hips. How can you find that? You may have to feel like you're pushing through the opposite heel that you're lifting the hand. How can you find more of that internal stability without the hips shifting side to side? You might have to slow down. You might have to use that inhale to find the pressure and only touch your hand on the exhale. And release. So you have the option to continue to do that, or maybe you come into plank pose. So knees off the floor, inhaling into the kidney area, and then switch side to side. And you notice the big sway first. How can you create more stability? How can you create less of that rock side to side? Maybe you have to slow it down. Maybe you have to only move as you exhale and you create that diaphragmatic pressure on the inhale. Release and come back to child's. Slow down the breath. Notice what happened with your breath as you increased the amount of work that your core has to do. And then reach the hands forward. Inhale, come up to hands and knees. Tuck the toes under, press the hips up and back into downward facing dog. Let's start to put this stuff together. So shift your weight to your left leg. Find your cues, lift your right leg up and back. Come onto your toe, lift knee towards nose as you step right foot up between your hands. Drop your left knee to the floor. Keep the toe tucked under. Inhale, reach the arms over the head. So coming into Anjaneyasana. Find your mirror. Inhale, extend into your ribs. Press down through the right foot as you lift left heel off the ground. So coming into Anjaneyasana, knee off the floor. Maintain your cues. Inhale, find the diaphragm expands the ribs. As you exhale, hands reach beside your hips. Hands reach back, hinge forward. Notice what happens to your ribs. Bring them in line with your hips. Hands to the floor. Step back to plank. Inhale, find diaphragm. Step right hand to left shoulder, tap down. Inhale, exhale, left hand to right shoulder, tap down. Inhale into your kidney area. Exhale, slowly release towards the floor as the kidney area remains ballooning up. All the way down, forehead to the floor, arms reach wide, T to the body. Slide right hand in, bend right knee. Inhale into your ribs. Exhale, start to take right foot towards left side of your mat. Roll back onto your belly. Straighten right leg, right arm. Left hand slides in, left knee bends. Inhale. Exhale, reach. left foot towards right side of the mat. Roll back onto your belly. Both hands come underneath your shoulder, tuck your toes under, lift your knees off the floor. Inhale, feel the breath move into the kidney. And as if it's a balloon, lifting your whole body back into plank and then back into downward facing dog. Pausing here to slow down the breath, to re-evaluate, feeling what's happening probably naturally at this point of time. Your body's learning. Shift your weight to your right foot. Maintain awareness as you lift left leg back. Look between your hands, step left foot up between your hands, drop your right knee to the ground. Inhale into the kidney area, let that lift you all the way up. Find ribs over hips. Inhale, fill up the rib cage. Keep everything still except for lifting the right leg off the ground. So nothing else shifts. When we find that connection to intra-abdominal pressure, we find that internal strength that we can move one region of the body without everything else moving. Inhale, fill up the back of the ribs. As you exhale, hands reach by your hips. As you hinge forward, belly hovering over your thigh. Notice what happens to the fronts of your ribs and align. Slowly lower both hands on either side as you step left foot beside right, coming into plank. Find the breath in the kidney area, so the back body. Keep everything stable as you touch right hand to left shoulder. Inhale, and as you exhale, other hand, bring the hand back down. Inhale to prepare. Exhale, keep that awareness of the back body being filled by the breath as you slowly lower all the way down. Forehead to the floor, arms stretch out. Slide right hand in, bend right knee. Inhale to prepare. Exhale to move. Inhale to prepare. Exhale, roll back. Slide left arm, left leg in. Inhale. As you start to exhale, move. Inhale. As you start to exhale, roll back to your belly. Hands come in line with the bottom of the rib cage. Tuck the toes under, lift the knees off the floor. Inhale into the back of the lungs. Use that to lift. And then dog. So when we find that zone of apposition, that mirror image, hips to ribs, we start to realize how much that helps to create kind of that inner awareness of core stability that creates strength and stability for the spine, strength and stability for the hips. It allows the neck to relax so that the neck doesn't have to cheat to help. Slowly lower the knees, toes touch, knees wide, sit back into child's pose. Coming back into that low, slow breath. Trying to make the breath as quiet as you can. So not hearing any noise inside your mind between your ears. You make it lighter, slower. And slowly shift forward to hands and knees. Take your block and place it between your thighs. Tuck your toes under. Chin tucked, neck long, collarbones wide. Bring your hands over your head. Draw your elbows down without flaring your ribs. So opening your chest and bring your hands to the back of your pelvis. Notice if the ribs start to flare, bring the zone of opposition into awareness. As if someone is pressing between your brow. So looking straight forward, start to lean back. Leaning back to where you can comfortably sustain this without losing that zone of opposition. Inhale and exhale, lift back up. Pause, let the breath settle. We're going to do this 2 more times. So find your zone as if someone is pressing you straight between your brows. Inhale to prepare. Exhale to lean back. So you're not lifting your head and otherwise. Lean back as far as you can, holding that zone of opposition. Inhale to prepare. Exhale, move forward. This time you have the option to go into hands back. The lift is going to come from the sternum. So it will lift up towards the sky, but you want to maintain, the ribs will move slightly forward. We are going into extension of our spine, but we're going with a stable core. So start first, someone pressing between your brows, keep your zone of opposition, lean back, bring one hand down, search for your heel, other down. Notice if you start to let go of that kind of awareness of the front of the core. Take the ribs down, then start to lift the top of the chest and the head continues. Chin continues to move towards throat, but you gaze up towards the sky. Inhale into your zone. Exhale, lift. Head comes up left. Remove the block and sit back. Let the breath come back into a slow, back bends always charge the breath up. So we're going to come into a final pranayama practice. If you want to sit on your heels in Vajrasana as we are, if sitting in this position is hard on your knees, by all means, any seated position, but perhaps lifting up your pelvis. So either blanket or block so that you can more easily find the zone of apposition. So we always think about like ears over the shoulders, shoulders over the hips. I'm going to encourage you to start to find like length in your spine by more positioning the bowl of your pelvis over your pelvic rim, which when you get into that, you'll find your ears are over your shoulders and your shoulders are over your hips. And just close your eyes. If you were to say the letter N, where your tongue touches the roof of the mouth, that is where the tip of your tongue should rest. The rest of the tongue is resting on the roof of the mouth, creating support for the nasal cavity, the bottom of the nasal cavity, which is the roof of your mouth. So tongue lays across the roof of your mouth. Relax your jaw. Relax your throat. And start to bring awareness to your breath. So starting first by feeling where in your torso your breath moves naturally in a seated position. So noticing where you feel movements. Where in the rib cage do you feel the most movement? Do you feel the top of the chest move? Do you feel the collarbones move? Or do you feel it more in the space that we've been working on? So the bottom of the rib cage. So those ribs at the top, you should only move when you are doing high cardiovascular work. So these are your accessory muscles that help to lift the top of the ribs and the collarbone so that you can bring more oxygen in when you're really need it, which is when you're at high levels of activity. So we only want to use the accessory muscles when they're necessary. So if you feel movement in the chest or the collarbones, try to concentrate on taking it lower, so deeper into the ribs. Feeling the expansion of the side ribs. And usually that means we have to quiet the breath. So instead of trying to force the expansion of the side ribs, think about it more than forcing it. And if you hear the breath within your mind, can you quiet the breath to the level that you no longer hear it? And as you start to go into this low and quiet breath, do you notice that it also starts to slow down? You're going to go into an alternate nasal breathing that might be a little different than the normal alternate nasal breathing you're used to. So begin by starting to sense which nostril do you feel the breath coming in more. So typically we go back and forth throughout the day, whether we have more air coming in through our right or the left. It switches about every 1 to 4 hours. So just notice where you're able to sense the breath more predominantly. And you're going to use your first finger on that side of your nose to plug the nose that you breathe in more freely right now. So just lightly close that nostril. And breathe in through the opposite. So oftentimes when we go into this alternate nasal breathing, we automatically try to move the breath into a bigger breath. Can you keep it low and light? Can you keep it slow? Trying to make the breath so quiet that you can barely even feel the air as it moves in and out through the nostril. And what you may be feeling with this is this overbearing tendency to take a bigger breath in. If you need to, do so. But see if you can sustain it. You are getting enough air in. It's just your body telling you that you're not, but you are. And then let that nostril go and just pause and feel. So with both nostrils open, notice how it feels to breathe after closing the nostril where your breath was more predominant initially. And notice if it's switched. It may not have, but just notice. And notice what else you feel. We're going to switch to the other side. So take the first finger of the same hand of the nostril that you're closing and close off the opposite nostril that you already closed. And switch into that light, low, and slow breath. So what we're trying to do is to build up a tolerance to carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is what regulates the blood chemistry of respiration. And the more tolerant our body becomes of carbon dioxide, the less we feel like we have to breathe faster and harder and more. And if you think of the times when we breathe faster and harder and more, that typically happens either when we're highly active or when we're stressed. Carbon dioxide is actually what triggers the parasympathetic nervous system and takes us down into that state of calm. And if we can regulate that, go ahead and release your nostril and breathe normally. We can start to shift stress that we feel when it's not necessary. Stress is helpful when we need it to kind of push us forward. But feeling stress all the time, feeling that urge to always take bigger breaths in is kind of bad for our nervous system. So as you pause here, notice how you feel. Notice how the mind feels. Notice the quality of your breath. Notice your posture. And slowly bring your hands to touch. Bow your head towards your heart. And thank you so much for joining me for this breath and movement class.